Few topics are as much debated as the one of free will. Since millennia, philosophers, theologians, and scientists have been arguing for or against the notion of free will. Is our future predetermined, in the sense that we are fated to act in one way or another, or do we have some control over our fate? Is free will just an illusion, as some scientists and philosophers say? And if it is so, how can I be made morally responsible for anything I do? Without a doubt, this fascinating topic is fundamental, as it is linked to other important concepts such as self, consciousness, human agency, determinism, and moral responsibility. Freedom of will is the ability of individuals to make choices, to act independently, and whether we have free will or not is extremely important. Perhaps having free will is one of the main attributes that really distinguishes a human being from an animal. When we see a tiger killing a human, we assume it is just its nature. It couldn't have done otherwise, and we usually don't take any revenge on the tiger and don't have many resentments towards it. Why don't we do the same with a human being who is a murderer? Why do we judge so harshly a human who has committed a murder, but we don't judge an animal who has also committed a murder? The answer to the question of whether we have free will or not would have the power to influence the way our entire society is run, our legal system, our morality, and the way we interact with each other on a daily basis. Some of the greatest philosophers stretch their minds to reply to such a question on whether free will exists or not. Names as Epicurus, Spinoza, Leibniz, Thomas Hobbes, David Hume, and more recently Daniel Dennett, Skinner, Chisholm, and many more. The concept of free will is often judged from the perspective of determinism, which is a philosophical view where all events are determined completely by previously existing causes. In other words, all of your daily actions are predetermined by previous events and by your own nature. If we input in a giant computer all the previous events that had happened in the world since the Big Bang, including all the previous activity of your brain, with all the laws of physics and with all the characteristics of your genes, with all your hormonal activity and everything that happened previously in your body, according to determinism, we would be able to calculate what you would do in the next second. And where is your freedom in that? It is easy to see that such a philosophical view as determinism puts the concept of free will in danger. Those philosophers who think determinism cannot coexist with the concept of free will are called incompatibilists. And those who think determinism can coexist with the concept of free will are called compatibilists. Traditionally, there are three main camps of philosophers. The camp of incompatibilists, who are determinists, who believe everything is predetermined and free will does not exist. The camp of compatibilists, who believe that determinism is true, but also that human beings have free will at least to some degree. And the camp of incompatibilists, who are libertarians. For them, determinism is not true, and humans do have free will. As a note, we must stress out that libertarianism here means philosophical libertarianism, which has nothing to do with what we know about political libertarianism. To help you understand more about the philosophical libertarianism, we will present in this video three different philosophers from the camp of libertarians, philosophers who believe determinism is not true and humans do have free will. Epicurus. Free will is a path to human flourishing. The first philosopher on our list is Epicurus, an ancient Greek philosopher who lived between 341 and 270 BCE. Having lived in antiquity, he is more of a proto-libertarian, being one of the first to address the issue of free will. He is the founder of Epicureanism, a philosophical view according to which humans are ultimately driven by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, and according to which a good life is a pleasurable life. Pleasure is considered the starting point of every choice. And if we look at our past decisions in life, we can see that most of the time, pleasure was the main drive in our decisions. Why else would you choose one career over another? Because either you were focused on the pleasure to have a job in the chosen field of study over another job in another field of study, or you were focused on the pleasure of making your parents happy, or on the pleasure of having a lot of money with which to buy pleasurable things and have pleasurable experiences. According to Epicureanism, people can sacrifice a small pleasure in the present to reach a greater pleasure in the future by using their free will or agency. We might not go to college because we take pleasure in learning, but we sometimes choose to go to college because we think of the pleasure of having later a stable job and money with which to buy things and experiences. But not all things are in our control, unfortunately. For example, you don't have control over the weather today. Epicurus said, quote, "Some things happen of necessity, others by chance, others through our own agency. Thus, some things are predetermined, like the weather today. Some happen by chance. There are random events at the quantum level according to physicists, but some things in this world are under our control." By believing in free will, Epicurus is a precursor of libertarianism. He was against the Democritus's atomic view of the world, in which atomic movement was controlled only by the laws of physics, because such a view didn't leave room for free will and moral responsibility. Epicurus believed that determinism or necessity destroys responsibility. We cannot be made responsible for things that are beyond our control. For example, if we have a brain tumor and it affects our free will, we cannot be made totally responsible for what we say or do. Our responsibility should be proportional to the amount of free will we have at our disposal. Also, chance is inconstant, unstable, and we cannot base our free will on randomness because we don't have control over random events and we cannot be responsible for them. Even the name random, implying the lack of any control. If it depends on chance, if you deliver a quality work at your job and not on your own free will to work hard in a focused way, how can you be praised or blamed based on the results? Epicurus considered that only the actions which are directed by our agency are autonomous and free will. Because we can perform such autonomous actions, governed by free will, we can be praised and blamed. Therefore, we can be morally responsible. But how can such a liberty exist in nature? Epicurus uses for that the notion of atomic swerve, a phenomenon in which atoms swerve or derail from their otherwise determined paths, initiating new causal chains. This phenomenon of atomic swerve allows us to have the freedom to act out of our own agency and to be morally responsible for our actions. Thus, in the heart of nature, there is a gate toward human free will, although Epicurus does not give full details of how this atomic swerve influences our decisions. Some might associate the atomic swerve with quantum mechanics, Brownian motion, or the principle of uncertainty, but these can probably induce only random processes in the decisional act, and for Epicurus, acting by chance is different from acting by one's own agency. Therefore, the notion of atomic swerve does not have an equivalent in modern physics, at least not yet. However, there is the notion of neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the nervous system to change its activity in response to different stimuli, by reorganizing its structure, functions, or connections. It is not clear how neuroplasticity is related to determinism, but some scientists, like Jeffrey Schwartz, observe that focused attention leads to neuroplastic brain changes that successfully treat obsessional compulsive disorder. Since focused attention is a conscious process, neuroplasticity could therefore be part of a mechanism for free will. We might feel inclined to relate the atomic swerve with neuroplasticity, as Epicurus considered that, in the process of our moral development, we have the power to change our beliefs and even our brains by our own free will. If you decide, for example, one day to change completely your lifestyle, you can do it out of your own act of free will by using your power of focused attention. You can start waking up earlier, working out every day to get in shape, cooking healthy food, and writing that novel you have always wanted to write. By using your free will, You will change your brain, and in time you will get adapted to the new lifestyle, and things will get easier to do. In Epicureanism, the more you exercise such a free will, the better, because you will increase your chances to develop your moral character and have a virtuous and pleasurable life. Thomas Reid, Free Will as Common Sense. The second philosopher who paved the way to today's libertarianism is Thomas Reid, a Scottish philosopher who lived between 1710 and 1796. He is one important figure of the Enlightenment, and he was the founder of the Scottish School of Common Sense. Considering that common sense should be the foundation of any philosophical inquiry, Thomas Reid was an advocate of direct realism. According to the direct realism philosophical view, or also called common sense realism, our senses provide us a direct awareness of the external objects as they are. Thus, the external objects as we perceive them are not just representations in our minds of those objects. Our perception of them gives us direct knowledge about them. However, he made a distinction between perception and senses. Perception is not the product of our senses. There is a complex process leading from sensation to perception, and this process gives us the knowledge of what is real. Thomas Reid developed his own theory of common sense and applied it to the problem of free will. Long story short, our common sense perception of us having free will is a clear indication that we indeed possess such a will, and it is not an illusion. Free will does not even require to be demonstrated, as it is a prerequisite of our interaction with the world. Furthermore, Thomas Reid thought that believing in free will was a test of one's sanity, and philosophy has a bad habit of complicating the question of what is real. Thomas Reid has been viewed by many as a champion of libertarian freedom, which he called moral liberty, and he directly connected this liberty to the notion of moral responsibility. He said, quote, "In every voluntary action, the determination of the will is the first part of the action, and the moral estimation of the action depends on that first part." Reid believed that we have the power to determine our own wills and that we are capable of free actions of which we are the cause and for which we are morally responsible. We have active power, meaning that we are free not only to act if we will to act, but that we are also free to refrain from willing. If you are confronted with a decision between two options, you might decide to refuse to take any decision. Thomas Reid opposed libertarian freedom to necessity, or determinism, which is, for him, the lack of moral liberty. For Thomas Reid, free actions are influenced by motives over which we do have control. For example, imagine you have to choose between preparing for an exam or interview and going out with your friends. You have the power to decide between the two, but in the process of the decision, you will be influenced by your desire to get a good mark at the exam or to pass the interview, and your desire to go out to socialize with your friends. You can then voluntarily focus on one of the two desires and choose the one you find appropriate at the moment. Whatever you choose, you will be responsible for your decision. Thomas Reid distinguished between different degrees of moral liberty, acknowledging that human liberty might be affected by mental illnesses and vicious habits that can impair the capacity for reasoning and, hence, moral liberty. Thus, in some cases, people do not act voluntarily. Their faculty of free will is impaired. We would judge differently the capacity of free will of a drunk person compared to a person who is not drunk. As recognized by biology and as our common sense tells us, there are voluntary and involuntary actions. Anything we have voluntarily done, we could have done otherwise if we had selected another motive to guide our action, and free will is exactly that capacity to have done otherwise. If your knee is hit by an object, you will involuntarily move your knee because of the knee-jerk reflex. It is an involuntary movement over which you do not have control. But as long as you have a normal, healthy constitution, your arm will never suddenly rise if you stand in a normal position with no other movement involved. You can only raise your arm through a voluntary command in this case, at your own free will. The belief that we are free in our choices and actions is one of Reid's first principles or principles of common sense. Indeed, this philosophical view of Thomas Reid is easy to understand, being so grounded in our common sense. Roderick Chisholm, Free Will as Agent Causation. The third philosopher to represent libertarianism that we chose for this video is Roderick Chisholm, who lived between 1916 and 1999. He was an American philosopher, and he is considered one of the most creative, productive, and influential American philosophers of the 20th century. Regarding the theory of free will, he was a champion of libertarianism, believing that we do act freely, and that it is more reasonable to trust our senses and memory in most situations than to doubt them. Our perception of reality does inform us that we do have free will. As a libertarian, for him, free will is incompatible with determinism. He was a defender of the theory of volition called agent causation, similar to the theory of common sense of Thomas Reid. According to the agent causation theory, free actions are caused by agents themselves rather than by some prior event or state of affairs, and the agents are responsible for their free actions. Chisholm said, quote, "If a man is responsible for a particular deed, and if what I have said is true, there is some event or set of events that is caused not by other events or states of affairs, but by the agent, whatever he may be." Chisholm believed, like other libertarians, that we are responsible for what we do only if we couldn't have done otherwise. And we could have done otherwise only if our actions were not causally determined by prior events, even internal events such as our own desires and beliefs. Because we might desire to perform an action and decide not to do that action, or we might believe in certain things but not act on those beliefs. You might wish to taste that delicious cake, but you decide not to due to your commitment to your diet regime. One interesting fact is that Chisholm was not only against determinism, but also against indeterminism. If indeterminism was true, then things would happen out of the blue, and the agent cannot be responsible for them. Our actions are not uncaused, thus, indeterminism is not true. And there is a difference between agent causation and event causation. Thus, determinism is also not true. The event causation, or transient causation, is the typical causation involved in a deterministic world. For example, if the temperature drops below the freezing point of water, the water would freeze, as simple physics tells us. The agent causation, or imminent causation, on the other hand, applies to the free actions performed by a human agent, which are not determined by prior events, but they are neither uncaused. They are caused by our own agency. Only for such free actions can we be responsible. These are events happening in our brain. We are not responsible for how our muscles act to move the hand, but we are responsible for the decision we took to move our muscles in the case of voluntary actions. We are not responsible for feeling angry or for having a certain belief, but we are responsible for what words we say and how we act. If someone does you wrong, you are not responsible for the anger or sadness you feel, but you are responsible for the words you say to that person and the actions you take against that person. Responsibility comes hand in hand with the notion of free will, and according to Chisholm, free will is linked to the unity of consciousness, which is a characteristic of human beings and perhaps of some other animals. The unity of consciousness means that all of the conscious mental states belong to a single conscious subject, which is us, our consciousness. Chisholm believed that the unity of consciousness must be considered a reality as it is based on our experience of the world, unless this unity can be proven false. And perhaps the same is true of free will. We should believe in free will unless proven false. In this episode, we briefly presented to you the philosophy on free will of Epicurus, Thomas Reid, and Roderick Chisholm. Do you agree with the theory of libertarianism that we really have free will and our actions are not determined? Tell us in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode to see what contra-arguments brought other philosophers against the libertarian free will. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Hypersophia. See you soon.